From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report in Special English. The international language of business is English, but a growing number of American companies that do business in China are having their workers learn Mandarin. Michael Chung is a Taiwanese-American internet entrepreneur and property developer. He is also in the business of teaching Chinese. Michael Chung is president and founder of the Mando Mandarin Online School. The school is based in New York and uses teachers in China to teach over webcams. Michael Chung says China is now the world's second largest economy. He says it makes sense to engage people in their own language and to understand their culture. He says that goes a long way in building strong relationships, especially with the Chinese. Michael Chung says that as China's economic power has increased, so has its cultural power. He says, starting in 2004, the Chinese Ministry of Education and the Chinese Language Council began to set up Confucius Institutes around the world. The purpose was to promote and develop Chinese language and culture teaching around the world. Now, he says, there are more than 300 Confucius Institutes in almost 100 countries. These institutes work to promote Chinese language at the university level. The Chinese government has partnered with colleges and the Asia Society to set up programs across the United States. High schools have also received money to start Chinese language training programs. Michael Chung says many English speakers want to learn Mandarin, and many people in China want to learn English. He adds that taking the time to learn someone else's language is a sign of respect and a way to build business relationships. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. About 1/3 of new nursing graduates in the United States are having trouble finding work. Alexandra Baranshub is finishing a master's degree program at the University of Maryland. She has done well in the program, earning the highest grade point average possible. But she is worried because she has not received job offers. Yet there is hope for nurses who complete studies at four-year schools or graduate-level programs. They have an easier time finding a job in healthcare than nurses graduating from a two-year degree program. Experts say there are fewer job openings because nurses in their 50s and 60s are delaying retirement. These workers are hoping to rebuild the savings they lost a few years ago during the financial crisis. Jane Kirschling is head of the University of Maryland's nursing school. She says weak economic conditions have created tensions in the job market. The number of students entering nursing school has risen sharply in recent years. At the same time, the United States is preparing for the retirement of millions of baby boomers. That is the name given to Americans born between the end of World War II and the early 1960s. Hundreds of thousands of nurses are expected to retire just as people their age need more medical care. Healthcare laws are changing in the United States. Health experts say they expect demand for nurses to care for the sick and aged to grow. They say many older nurses will retire if the economy improves. This would create job openings for younger nurses and recent college graduates. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report in Special English. President Obama had little time to celebrate his re-election in early November. He now turns his attention to negotiations with congressional leaders. By law, the United States faces a combination of big spending cuts and tax increases next year to deal with its budget deficits. Together, these measures are being called a fiscal cliff, and economists say they could push the country back into a recession. The Congressional Budget Office says that if current policies continue, they will place the budget on an unsustainable path. But the CBO warned that deep cuts could hurt economic growth. That would reduce federal revenue from taxes. Democrats and Republicans are trying to reach a deal on deficit reductions valued at over $600 billion. Those policies are to take effect on January 1st, 2013. They will happen unless the two main parties can reach agreement. The cuts would affect both the military spending that the Republican Party wants and the social programs supported by President Obama and his Democratic Party. The Democrats control the United States Senate, while Republicans hold a majority in the House of Representatives. One issue is whether to extend tax rate reductions that have been in place for years. Those tax cuts are set to disappear at the end of this year. The reduced tax rates apply to all Americans, whatever they earn. Republican lawmakers say they continue to support all of the lower tax rates. But President Obama and Democratic Party leaders have been seeking to end the tax cuts for the wealthiest taxpayers. Both sides have signaled a willingness to compromise. But without agreement, painful budget measures are sure to take effect. For VOA Learning English, I'm Mario Ritter.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The South African Department of Labor reported last month that the nation has too few jobs for unskilled laborers. The department also said there are not enough workers for highly skilled positions. The sharp differences between jobs and skills were apparent recently when officials advertised a job opening in the government. The position was that of Auditor General or Chief Financial Supervisor. With a 26% unemployment rate nationwide, there was no shortage of interest in the job. 90 people asked to be considered, but officials said many of them lacked the necessary skills or education. The Auditor General is responsible for supervising and independently examining South Africa's finances. The advertisement said the position required the person to be a trained accountant, but many unqualified people applied. The Labor Department report blamed the nation's poor education system. But for unskilled workers, the story is very different. Restaurant industry official T.J. Vonderwalt says the businesses he works with get a huge number of applications for every job. Seja Motopo Motau is a member of South Africa's parliament. He says education has been a major problem in South Africa's development. He notes that many blacks received a poor education under white minority rule. Apartheid officially ended in 1994. He says many people are university graduates, but they cannot get jobs where there is a need for skilled workers. This is because the education these graduates have is not enough to place them in jobs with high skill requirements. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. In South Africa, the rate of unemployment is about 25%. Some businesses and economists say South African labor laws are too restrictive. They say the rules are keeping the jobless rate so high. Business leaders are especially concerned about laws on hiring and firing workers. Here is one example. Simon Arcus dismissed an employee who stabbed another worker. The fired employee took the businessman to labor court. Mr. Arcus spent $7,000 in court costs before he reached a settlement with the worker. He says he never should have had to pay those costs. He says the incident also cost him and his workers time. Business owners like Simon Arcus believe it should be easier to dismiss workers. Now, owners must give an employee a warning in person and then 2 separate written warnings. Next comes a hearing where employees can defend their actions. Only after that can employees be fired. But fired workers can still appeal their dismissal in labor court. Lawyer Shamima Gaibi works with labor unions. She says workers need legal protections. She notes the case of striking mine workers in the town of Marikana. Police shot and killed 34 miners last year when a strike turned violent. Still, many people say labor laws are slowing growth. South Africa was rated next to last in hiring and firing practices in a report from the World Economic Forum. Lucy Holborn is with the South Africa Institute for Race Relations. She says the country's businesses are under pressure to help end poverty and inequality while creating jobs. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
I'm Carolyn Presutti with the VOA Special English Economics Report. Americans have been watching the protests in the Middle East and North Africa, and closer to home. Workers in Wisconsin, and now some other states, have been protesting efforts to limit the negotiating power of government employees. Wisconsin's newly elected governor, Scott Walker, says limits on labor unions are needed to help cut a deficit in the state budget. The Republican governor proposes to end collective bargaining rights for most public employees, except on the issue of wages. The bill has led to big, noisy demonstrations that began in February in Madison, the state capital. The bill would not affect police or firefighters. They are barred from striking. But firefighter Mahlon Mitchell came to protest anyway. Democrats in the state Senate fled to the neighboring Midwestern state of Illinois. They want to prevent the Republican majority in the Wisconsin legislature from passing the bill, which they consider anti-union. Labor unions are a traditional base of support for the Democratic Party. Governor Walker says the state could have to start dismissing workers unless the Democrats return to debate what he calls a budget repair bill. Dennis Dresang is Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of Wisconsin. He says the modern history of the state helps explain the strong reaction. He said Wisconsin was the first state in the nation to establish the right of public employees to bargain collectively. So it is a real shock to a lot of people that these rights would be taken away. Collective bargaining rights differ from state to state. Lawmakers in Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio have also proposed limits on unions representing public employees. Critics say politicians are using state budget problems as an excuse for union busting in an effort to take away rights to organize. Unions have been shrinking in private industry. The Labor Department says only 7% of workers in the private sector now belong to one. But more than 1/3 of government workers hold union cards. Local governments are the most unionized. Over 42% of workers, like teachers, healthcare workers, and public safety employees, are union members. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. For more news and to tell us your thoughts about organized labor, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Economics Report. The chief executive who presented the latest and coolest electronics to the world has stepped down. Steve Jobs announced his resignation as head of Apple in a letter. He wrote, "I have always said if there ever came a day When I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, that day has come. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started Apple Computer in 1976. The company sold a new kind of electronic device, the personal computer. Apple Computer grew more quickly than anyone could have imagined. In 1985, however, Steve Jobs resigned after disputes with managers who had been brought in to direct business operations. He soon started his own software company, Next, and bought a computer animation studio. The Pixar movie studio would go on to create movies like Toy Story and Finding Nemo. They are two of the most successful animated films ever made. Apple struggled during the 1990s. Many products failed. The company began losing money and its stock price sank. In 1997, Apple bought Next and brought back Steve Jobs. Apple used software developed at Next to create the Mac OS computer operating system. The next year, Apple became profitable, and a series of highly successful products followed. In 2001, Apple released the iPod, a digital music player. The iPhone arrived in 2007. Apple has also been a leader in online marketing. The iTunes Music Store sells songs for download. The App Store sells applications for computers and mobile devices. Steve Jobs is closely linked with the success of Apple. Investors were scared when he announced he had an operation for pancreatic cancer in 2004. His decision to leave comes as Apple continues to release winning products. Apple sold over 4.5 million iPads in the first 3 months of this year. The company holds the largest share of the growing tablet computer market. On August 9th, Apple first passed ExxonMobil Corporation to become the most valuable publicly traded company in the world. Since then, the two companies have traded the lead. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. You can learn English and stay informed every day from your computer or mobile device at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and iTunes at VOA Learning English.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report in Special English. Many children first learn the value of money by receiving an allowance. The purpose of an allowance is to teach children about money. Children can learn how to manage money, especially at an early age, when financial mistakes are not very costly. The amount of money that parents give to their children to spend as they wish differs from family to family. Timing is another consideration. Some children get a weekly allowance, others get a monthly allowance. Parents should make clear what, if anything, the child is expected to pay for with the money. At first, young children may spend all of their allowance soon after they receive it. If they do this, they will learn the hard way that spending must be done within a budget. Parents are usually advised not to offer more money until the next allowance. The object is to show young people that a budget demands choices between spending and saving. Older children may be responsible enough to save money for larger costs like clothing or electronics. Many people who have written on the subject of allowances say it is not a good idea to pay your child for work around the home. These jobs are a normal part of family life. Paying children to do extra work around the house, however, can be useful. It can even provide an understanding of how a business works. Allowances give children a chance to experience the things they can do with money. They can share it in the form of gifts or giving to a good cause. They can spend it by buying things that they want, or they can save and maybe even invest it. Saving helps children understand that costly goals require sacrifice. You have to cut costs and plan for the future. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Many Thais joined protests in Bangkok last year. They urged Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra to deal with the growing problem of corruption in their country. How much economic activity is lost to corruption is difficult to estimate. The University of the Thai Chamber of Commerce studied the issue not too long ago. The university found that more than 2% of all of the goods and services produced in Thailand, or worth about $11 billion, will likely be lost to corruption this year. According to the researchers, many business people say they are paying more to Thai officials and politicians to win government contracts. Political economist Pasuk Panchaychit says there is evidence that officials are making progress in controlling low-level corruption. But, she says, the slowing world economy means growing competition for profitable deals with the government. Bandit Nichadawan is a former central bank official and president of the Thai Institute of Directors. He says corruption in Thailand appears to be more of a problem now than it was 10 years ago. And the problem affects more than Thailand. The American-based Center for International Policy says that more than $2.7 trillion in illegal funds left China between 2001 and 2010. The money left as a result of criminal financial deals, corruption, tax evasion, or other illegal activities. For Thailand, the amount was $64 billion during the same period. In 2003, the United Nations passed a convention against corruption, but observers say the fight against corruption needs to go beyond law enforcement. They say it must include non-governmental organizations and private industry groups. For VOA Learning English, I'm Laurel Bowman.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report in Special English. 5 nations held the 5th BRICS Summit at the end of March in Durban, South Africa. The 5 BRICS nations are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. For years, these nations have said they do not have a strong voice in world events. All 5 countries have strong economies, but none has been asked to lead the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. India, Brazil, and South Africa have all campaigned without success for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council. Anil Suklal is South Africa's ambassador to the BRICS group. He says the group can overcome historical imbalances by giving each nation power over a proposed development bank. The bank would be collectively owned by all the BRICS countries. Emilio Pera is with Ernst & Young Business Advisory Services. He says a development bank is a good idea for financing public works projects and strengthening cooperation between the BRICS nations. A report from South Africa's Standard Bank says each nation is expected to donate $10 billion for the bank. China's economy alone is bigger than that of the 4 other countries combined. For China, $10 billion is not a lot of money. But for South Africa, it represents almost half of the country's education budget. At the IMF and the World Bank, members donate money based on the size of their economy. Standard Bank's Simon Fremantle says it could be a long time before the bank is launched. He thinks the bank has a long process through which it still has to travel in order to reach the point where it can extend loans. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Attacks from Boko Haram militants are hurting the economies of Chad and northern Cameroon. The militants often attack trucks bringing goods to the Central African nations. Some of the goods come from Borno State in nearby Nigeria. Borno State is currently under the control of the Islamist militants. Nafisa Aja works at one of the most popular stores in N'Djamena, the capital of Chad. She says the store has not received supplies from Borno State for several months. Business is slow because of the attacks on the trucks that transport supplies. Tukba Haman is a truck driver. He says he no longer goes to Nigeria for supplies because Boko Haram targets trucks and kills drivers. Abdul Saeed works as a customs official in Chad. He says Boko Haram recently attacked trucks in Gambaro, a Nigerian town on the border with Cameroon. He says Boko Haram fighters have attacked and seized many vehicles in recent weeks. Abba Kabir is a member of Cameroon's National Assembly. He says the economies of northern Cameroon and Chad are suffering because the militants control the roads in Nigeria. Simple goods and manufactured products like telephones and farming tools enter Chad on these roads. He says if Boko Haram continues to control the border roads, economic activity will continue to be weak in Chad, northern Cameroon, and parts of northeastern Nigeria. He says he and others are calling on the military to stop the militants and their attacks. For VOA Learning English, I'm Ann Ball. From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. China's economic growth slowed during the first 3 months of this year. Chinese government media reported recently that the nation's gross domestic product, or GDP, grew at 6.7% between January and March. GDP represents the value of all goods and services produced within a country. China is the world's second largest economy. The 6.7 growth rate was the slowest there since the start of the world financial crisis 7 years ago. In the final 3 months of 2015, the Chinese economy grew 6.8%. The National Bureau of Statistics said the economy is meeting the central government's expectations. The official full-year target for economic growth is 6.5 to 7%. China's GDP has averaged almost 10% growth a year since 1978, according to the World Bank. The economy has slowed over the past 5 years. The government has reacted by cutting interest rates and increasing spending on public works projects. The government is also trying to get the public to buy more Chinese-made goods and services. Economists told the Associated Press a decrease in building projects and weak exports are reasons for the slower economic growth. Economic experts say they predict China's economy will grow at a slower rate than normal this year. The Associated Press news agency said an expansion of just 6.3% is expected this year. For VOA Learning English, I'm Ann Ball.